Pull up any map of the world and zoom in on one spot. Right there, between Alaska and Russia, you'll see something almost impossible. Two superpowers, two worlds, separated by less than 55 miles of freezing Arctic water. That's the Bering Strait. And right now, engineers are asking the most dangerous question in the history of infrastructure. What if we just connected them? If you think this sounds insane, stick around, because the plan is more real than you've ever been told. And before we dive in, subscribe to the channel right now. Hit that bell, because we cover the engineering stories that mainstream media ignores, and you do not want to miss what's coming next. Let's start with the geography, because it's both the miracle and the nightmare of this entire project. The Bering Strait sits at the top of the world, wedged between two of the most powerful nations on Earth, the United States and Russia. At its narrowest crossing, the two continents sit just 55 miles apart. There are even two small islands, sitting almost perfectly in the middle, the Diomede Islands. One American, one Russian, separated by just 2.4 miles, and the international date line. Stand on one island, and you are literally looking at tomorrow. That's not a metaphor. That's geography. The strait is shallow, averaging only about 100 to 165 feet deep in most sections, which is almost nothing compared to the deep ocean trenches that engineers deal with in other mega projects. On paper, the crossing seems almost generous. So, why hasn't it been built yet? Because paper is not the Arctic, and the Arctic does not care about your blueprints. The moment you start talking about actually building here, the environment hits back with everything it has. Temperatures in the region regularly drop to -40 degrees Fahrenheit. Sea ice forms and shifts and grinds with forces that can crush steel. Permafrost, permanently frozen ground, covers vast stretches of both the American and Russian sides. Permafrost is one of the most treacherous foundations an engineer can work with. It looks like solid ground. But heat it up, from machinery, from infrastructure, from climate change, and it turns into unstable mush. Entire buildings have been swallowed, roads have buckled and cracked, pipelines have shifted and snapped, and in the Arctic there is no cavalry coming to fix it quickly. Supply chains are stretched to the limit. Workers cannot be easily replaced. Logistics that would take a week in a temperate zone can take months up here. Everything, every bolt, every cable, every liter of fuel has to be transported to the edge of the world first. And then there's the seismic issue. The Bering Strait region sits near the Pacific Ring of Fire, one of the most geologically active zones on Earth. Earthquakes are not just possible here, they are expected. Any structure crossing this strait would need to absorb the kind of ground movement that collapses ordinary bridges and tears tunnels apart at their joints. Engineers would need to design a crossing that doesn't just survive earthquakes, but rides them. A structure built to flex without breaking, to absorb movement without transferring catastrophic stress to any single point. That kind of engineering does not come cheap, and it does not come easy. The physics are brutal, but the solutions exist if the money and the political will exist alongside them, because this is where the conversation gets complicated. The Bering Strait crossing is not just an engineering problem, it is a geopolitical one. Connecting the United States and Russia with a physical structure raises questions that go far beyond logistics. Who controls it? Who funds it? What happens during conflict? What happens during another Cold War? For decades, the idea has floated in and out of serious discussion. In the 1990s, after the Soviet Union collapsed, Russian and American entrepreneurs started genuinely mapping out the concept. There were proposals for a tunnel, a bridge, even a combination of both. One ambitious vision called for an intercontinental peace park, a binational protected wilderness zone spanning both sides of the strait, turning the crossing into a monument to cooperation rather than competition. That idea never moved forward. The politics froze it long before the Arctic could, but the engineering vision never died. In fact, it evolved. Modern proposals center on a tunnel rather than a bridge, for good reason. A tunnel avoids the catastrophic surface exposure to Arctic storms and floating sea ice. A submerged tunnel could be designed to sit below the worst of the seismic activity, anchored into bedrock rather than resting on a surface that shifts. The depth of the strait, shallow enough to work with but deep enough to protect the structure, actually works in favor of a tunnel approach. Engineers have studied the seabed in detail. The geology, while challenging, is not impossible. The crossings would likely require multiple tunnel bores, separate passages for rail traffic in each direction, plus a central service and emergency corridor, the same proven design used in the Channel Tunnel between England and France, and in Istanbul's Marmaray crossing beneath the Bosphorus. Those precedents matter enormously. The Channel Tunnel proved that long underwater tunnels can be built, operated safely, and maintained for decades under extreme engineering conditions. Istanbul's tunnels proved that even earthquake zones are conquerable. The Marmaray crosses one of the world's most seismically active regions and has operated without catastrophic incident. The lessons from those projects would be applied directly to a Bering Strait tunnel: flexible segmented construction, continuous seismic monitoring, redundant safety systems, and ventilation infrastructure that can handle full tunnel evacuations without panic. The technology exists. The knowledge exists. What has always been missing is the convergence of funding and political will on both sides of the water. The scale of what a Bering Strait crossing would unlock is almost difficult to fully absorb. For the first time in human history, it would be physically possible to drive or take a train from New York City to London. Not a boat, not a plane. A continuous overland and under-tunnel route connecting the Americas to Europe and Asia in a single unbroken journey. The Trans-Siberian Railway already connects Moscow to the Russian Far East. Road and rail networks across Alaska and Canada are substantial. The missing link, the 55-mile gap of freezing water, is the only thing standing between a continental connection and a truly intercontinental one. Trade corridors would be redrawn. Freight that now crosses oceans by ship could move by land and tunnel at competitive speeds and costs. Energy infrastructure, pipelines, electrical grids could be integrated across continents. The economic implications are not billions of dollars, they are trillions. The projected cost of the crossing itself ranges widely depending on the design chosen, but serious estimates cluster around $65 to $100 billion for a full tunnel system with supporting infrastructure on both sides. That number sounds enormous until you compare it to what it would unlock: the permanent rewiring of intercontinental trade routes, the reduction of shipping costs between Asia and North America, the opening of resource corridors in some of the least developed but most mineral-rich regions on Earth. Economic models have suggested that over a 50-year horizon, the returns on investment could exceed the construction cost many times over, if the political framework can be established to make it function. That is the conditional that haunts every version of this conversation. If Russia and the United States can agree, if funding mechanisms can be structured across two different economic systems, if the project can survive changes in government, changes in relationship, changes in the definition of what these two nations mean to each other, engineers are ready, the technology is ready, the geology, while difficult, is workable. What the Bering Strait crossing is waiting for is something harder to build than any tunnel. A moment when the human beings on both sides of the water decide that connection matters more than division. History has shown that infrastructure has a way of outlasting the politics that built it. The Channel Tunnel survived Brexit. Istanbul's crossings survived coups and earthquakes and economic crises. The structures that connect us tend to persist even when the relationships that created them fracture. Maybe that is the most powerful argument for building the Bering Strait crossing now, while the idea still lives in the space between impossible and inevitable. Because once it's built, it stops being a symbol of cooperation and becomes something far more durable. It becomes a fact, and facts are very hard to undo. That's everything for today, and if this story rewired how you see the world, subscribe to the channel right now and hit the notification bell. We have an upcoming video about the tunnel that engineers say could change Asia forever, and you will not want to miss it. Click right here to watch that next. See you there.